Welcome to Shaping the New York City Skyline, the podcast that explores the stories behind the buildings that shape our city. I'm your host, Brenda Slokowski, and I'm here with my co-host,
David Shamshovich. Welcome, Skyliners, to another edition of Shaping the NYC Skyline with me, David, and my two amazing co-hosts, Brenda and Camilla. Say hello.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
It's summer. It's hot in here. And we had a wonderful guest by the name of Kevin Elkins, who is the head of the Carpenters Union.
This is a fresh episode, guys.
Not only that, but completely different than what we've done so far.
Yeah. We're not going to be hearing a lot of, developer side, perspectives. We're going to hear a lot of what it was like to negotiate the wages in connection with the 485X, which I think a lot of people will be interested in hearing from this different side of things about what workers want and what they're fighting for. And his fight basically started from the time that he began his career at the Carpenters Union, which is 3 years ago.
I really liked hearing the progression from political campaign to political campaign, figuring out what the community needs and what issues the candidate should focus on. And then he went and took that knowledge of how to figure out what the community needs, implemented it into the Carpenters Union and saying, our community is the workers who are building these buildings. What do they need, and how do I get that for them?
Kevin was wonderful, and has so mumuch experience and so much inside information to tell us. Comes from Staten Island, which is mainly Republican conservative, and he's a Democrat, and he really felt inspired when Obama became president, as many of the youth did. And he didn't know what 421A was before he started. And he dreamt about it for years, making sure that any new program would be accompanied by a wage floor or a minimum wage.
Put down your tool belts.
Get ready for Kevin Elkins, political director of the New York City District Council of Carpenters.
Woo!
Hello, Brenda and Camilla. And hello to our guest, who shall remain anonymous despite the fact that he's appearing on camera.
just for a few seconds.
I'm always trying to make this podcast more than it actually is. It's like a, what is the real popular one? Smartless, which I love. If we were celebrities,
No, I wouldn't be able to take the social media scrutiny.
You would love it.
No, I don't think.
Couldn't do it.
I don't have the stomach for it either.
Yeah. Well, everybody go to my Instagram and like the new picture that I posted.
So anyways, let's get down to business. We have a very interesting guest, someone with, I think that our Skyliners are really, really going to enjoy. It's very different from what we've had in the past, which is what we try to do, right? We want to shake things up. We want to make things different. And we want to hear different perspectives. And I think it's an interesting one. It's a good one. And it's a person who's been fighting the good fight. He's a Staten Island native. He graduated with a poli-sci degree, and he put that degree to good use, including with former Congressman Max Rose, former New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer, and Staten Island DA Michael McMahon, or former DA Michael McMahon. And most currently, he was appointed as the political director of the New York City District Council of Carpenters. It's a mouthful, NYCDCC. That happened in March 2021, about 3 years ago. And his leadership has been characterized by a proactive approach to political engagement, a steadfast commitment to the rights and well-beings of construction workers. And he'll tell us more about the good fight that he's fighting, the issues that he's tackling, and of course, what's to come. I want to give a very warm Skyliner welcome to Mr. Kevin Elkins.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Kevin, I very much appreciate you showing up and
schlepping all the way to Midtown.
So let's start at the beginning. What was you grew up on Staten Island, which is in and of itself a very politically different from the other 5 boroughs, and I assume it shaped some of who you were. How, what did your parents do? How did you grow up? What did you want to do as you grew up, and what did you end up becoming interested in, and that got you into this business?
Sure. I'm one of 9 kids at this point. Yeah. So definitely different in and of itself. And then Staten Island being Staten Island, different as you noted.
Where do you fall in the hierarchy of siblings?
That's a good question.
I am the third from the bottom.
Okay.
So I was the baby, and then I was no longer the baby, so I'm still dealing with the psychological trauma.
Right. Yeah, very much so. I get that.
And now, so I have all the worst probable qualities of babies and middle children. But and then grew up in the South Shore of Staten Island, which is probably a very conservative place, to put it politely. And then around end of high school, college, I got interested in politics and what have you. President Obama was running at the time for the presidency for the first time. So I think a lot of people in my age cohort got inspired by that. And so that's how I ended up working in politics and doing little local campaigns and all that stuff that set me on this path here.
Yeah. And you went to college in Staten Island as well, right?
I did. I did not want to go to, but my parents unfortunately told me you shouldn't get a lot of student debt, which I was devastated
I was
about.
really smart about.
Yeah.
I know they just didn't understand what I was going through at the time. But honestly, it was probably the best.
You mean like
decision I
living
ever
with
made.
them while going to school?
No, just not taking on $120,000
Yeah.
in debt that I would have no plan to pay off, because politics isn't exactly where
Right.
you make quite a bit of money. So
Well,
Yeah.
I have that debt for you in case you want to borrow some.
I'm fine. It's all yours. It's all yours.
Luckily, she can't transfer it to you.
Right.
So
Right.
it makes sense. So going back to Staten Island is obviously very much known for its more conservative roots, which is what you implied. Obama was, one of these liberal progressives, what do you want to call it, I guess, back in the day, who inspired lots of the youth. But I'm not sure how much effect he had on those in Staten Island, given conservative parents, right? You generally will listen to what your parents are saying and follow suit. So how did you break that mold? Were your parents just in a different camp and different thinkers?
Yeah, it wasn't like they were overly political people. I'm the only person involved in politics in my family. Well, I used to be now. Now my stepbrother actually is involved too. But for the most part, politics wasn't really a big thing. I think it's more of a value statement of how we were raised. It wasn't like I was rebelling and they were Republicans. But ironically, President Obama actually only lost, I think, Staten Island by like 4 points in the first election. Then he won it in the second one. So it was sort of before, I think, a lot of the polarization that you've seen today really took hold in a really dramatic fashion.
So what do you think happened that changed people's minds and that shifted those political winds?
I think Obama and Trump are probably the same. They're the same kind of politics, but different ways of going about it in a really dramatic fashion, right? Maybe it's very yin and yang. They were both outsiders, both change-oriented, both the system needs to be upended and reformed. They said it in very different ways and went about enacting it in very different ways, I think, which is probably the most respectful way to go about saying it. And I think that's appealing to places like Staten Island and Long Island too, where they feel disconnected from the city at large, that their policies that are placed on them are unfair and they don't get their fair share, and there's a giant chip on your shoulder because you're from the outer boroughs. So all of that, I think, creates an environment where outsider candidates tend to do really well on a presidential level. And Trump, I think, channeled a lot of that rage and anger, and frankly, in unhealthy ways, I think. But that's what he did, and he comes from that background, right? That Queens mentality that is probably a median Fox News viewer, as he is frequently watching. So he channels it because he is them. So I think that's why he's uniquely popular in a lot of those areas.
Yeah. No, I think it is a good way of you to say it without casting aspersions, which is the way I probably would have said it, which is why I'm glad nobody asked me that question. So you, when you went to school, you did 4 years, right, as a poli-sci major. You graduated. I guess you didn't decide to pursue another degree, but you went right into work. What was that first position? How did you get it, and what was that like?
I was working for like local city council campaigns that no one thought had any chance of winning. So because of that, I was able to do things that other people, that someone my age would not have been able to do, writing press releases, speeches, designing mail, all that kind of stuff, handling the voter targeting. So I was able to, I think, dramatically accelerate my education in politics because of that, because I wasn't going where everybody else was. And so after a year or two of that, I decided, I had different opportunities. I was able to work for then Congressman Mike McMahon in his re-election campaign as a congressman. He lost. So after that, I went to go work for the Staten Island Democratic Party, where at being on Staten Island, the Democrats continued to lose. So I was getting a real education in how not to win a campaign. And then after that, I was able to go work for different elected officials in a government capacity.
What are the takeaways that you really took from those campaigns and that political activity that you now utilize in your current position?
Oh, geez, I don't know. It's the whole experience you bring along with you. So, it's like some people. I joke that like you learn more when you lose. So by that standard, I'm a bit of a genius. But so you learn like to break some of the molds and the conventional wisdom that everyone just takes for granted. The importance of money, the importance of in political campaigns, what works, what doesn't. Some demographics sometimes are destiny, sometimes they're not, and how to see how they all come together and link to paint the narrative that you need to paint in order to win, and that you can't really neglect any aspect of a campaign or a policy fight. It has to be sort of the full spectrum in order to guarantee that you're going to win. Because if you neglect one, you might win, but you're not going to win like you should have won. So you can't really take your foot off the gas.
What made you transfer into like a stable role of the communications director rather than working on different campaigns and going from campaign to
So when I was
campaign?
working for Mike McMahon, that was when he was a district attorney candidate. So he had lost, but he was for Congress and was coming back as a district attorney. So that was campaign. When I shifted over to government prior to that and after that, it was because I needed a job, which is a pretty nice incentive to learn to sort of get done. So that's what I did. And then in 2017, I left Comptroller Scott Stringer's office to go manage Max Rose's campaign, which a lot of people didn't really understand. But pointing back to what I saw before, if you're able to look at the whole picture and see the way things are aligning, you can sometimes take those calculated risks, and we did, and we won.
Yeah, and those are very interesting positions. As borough director for Scott Stringer, I know that you've had a lot of, or at least I read, and you're going to tell us more, there's a lot of outreach with the community and trying to bring government and communities together, which is not too dissimilar from what you're doing now, and that really laid some of the groundwork, I think, for your current position. What kind of things, I don't really understand what that role entails and what your job responsibilities were, so maybe you want to just touch upon that a little bit.
Sure. So I think in any sort of community liaison job for an elected official, it's a government form of campaigning, although with the goal being you're going to help and connect constituents with services rather than winning an election. So town halls, attending civics, meetings, fairs, everything, educating people about what that particular elected official does and taking intake, what's going on in their community, and does that office have the ability to improve it in any way, shape, or form? Like when I was working for Max, the previous elected official, and my understanding is the successor, if it's not federally related, they didn't think to help the person. They were like, we'll transfer you, we'll do that. Max had a very different philosophy. I don't think the Staten Island DOT talked to a congressman more than they ever talked to us, because we were calling them about random potholes and this and that. At one point, some constituent had paid for a summer camp, and the constituent's kid got really sick, so couldn't go. They wouldn't give the deposit back. We actually called and got the deposit back. So it was really, no matter how small it was, we were getting involved and trying to help them. Yeah. So but it all depends on the elected official and what their priorities are.
He's a younger guy, right? So or at least at that time, he was a younger guy. So is that how you met with one another and was inspired?
We're very close. He actually just officiated my wedding. So we're
Congratulations.
Very, very close friends. And so that was a natural, I think, evolution in our friendship and everything when he decided to run. We both had the same vision, and so we went out to execute it. Yeah. And so, no one thought we could do it. We were abandoned by the National Party more times than I can count. Although we loved the people we worked with there in the organization, they made cold, hard, calculated decisions that Max had no shot. And then the week before the election, we got a pullback, and all of a sudden everyone woke up. But we were the one of, I think, as us, and I was really pissed off that there was a elected official who won in Oklahoma who was more of a surprise than we were. Otherwise, we would have been the number one upset.
But it was, I guess it was close.
It was. It was Dan Donovan, who was Mr. Staten Island. And so no one really thought that he could do it. We harnessed a lot of, I think, that outsider energy that other elected officials, Trump, others, used to some extent. I think we used it in a more positive way, but, everyone's got their opinion.
And you're a campaign manager, like you're the head of this thing, running the whole show. Is that something that was overwhelming? And how did you go about it? How did you know what to do?
You fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
In many respects. So, we had a very fun group of staff members, all very young. It was during the 2018 election, so there was a lot of people looking to get involved and do something for the first time because they were upset with the way things were going in Washington. And so we had a huge influx. We were the only competitive seat in the city, so it was quite the ride. We'd have to get thousands of volunteers out the door in one single day, train them all how to talk, not be Upper West Side liberals and offend everybody along the way. So it was definitely an experience, and we're all a lot of the staff is still very close behind me.
Afterward, you stayed on and worked as district director, right, for him. So what was your role there, and what are the things that you're most proud of?
So he secured a record amount of money for the opioid epidemic. Then the pandemic hit, and I mean, that was quite the shock to the system. So the first month was trying to make sure everyone got their unemployment insurance, because I don't know if you remember, it was an absolute disaster. Yeah. So and after that, when Staten Island was sort of the ground zero in many respects for the pandemic in the city, for the first time, Staten Island was actually getting resources nobody else was getting. So we had the first drive-in testing facility. They built a whole intake, 100-something room hospital, basically, in 7 days. And one thing after that, we were fighting to get the businesses open because they were dying in many respects, that they had no income. And frankly, a lot of the rules didn't make sense then. And I think with time, it was very clear they didn't make sense around keeping businesses closed. So that whole response was, I think, pretty breathtaking. He was the one first advocating for that giant medical ship to come to New York when it was looking really bad. Of course, we found out later it was a completely unusable thing for COVID, but it was good intentions. And we fought the fight to make sure Staten Island got a lot of resources and South Brooklyn. And so, and TP was a key figure in trying to get the 9/11 first responders bill passed. That was like the final bill that needed to pass, because over and over again, their health care for people who were there that day was never enough. They kept passing bills, and it wouldn't be enough because of all the different complexities. So this was sort of the final piece of legislation that could really cover everybody. So that was a huge, huge victory. So there were a lot of different stuff that was going on. So
when the pandemic did hit, how did that hit your station and the people that you worked with and yourself? How did you guys go about doing your jobs when everything was basically remote for a while?
We were remote, but depending on the person and people's comfort level, we were out there in the community as much as we could be, right? I was, even when Max had to go to the hospitals and everything to tour and do all that kind of stuff, I was there with him. So it was, when you join that kind of a position, you expect to be on the front lines when an emergency happens. Yeah. Not in a first responder sense, but being the person supporting those efforts and helping to coordinate them, and making sure they're all linking together, because sometimes the right hand does not talk to the left hand. So that's what we signed up for.
So then you make it to the Carpenters Union. How does that position come about? Mm-hmm. And why did you decide? Well, I guess you decided because Max lost in his re-election bid?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So I needed a job again. It's a common theme. So I saw the opening and applied. I went through a very rigorous process. Joe Geiger, who's the head of the union, the Carpenters Union had been still is under federal receivership. So the federal government still has to supervise a lot of different things. So Joe, when he took over, had to deal with a lot of cleaning up unions and making sure everything was transparent, and creating all these new protocols and mechanisms in place to make sure that the union was not the union that people sometimes had these caricatures of. And so after many years of cleaning it up and putting it into place for success, he wanted to really rebuild the political department. There was a strong foundation from my predecessors, and he wanted to take it to another level. And so when the opportunity came, my predecessor retired. I interviewed and thankfully was picked because he thought I could bring the skill sets necessary to execute his vision.
And what was his vision, and what were those skills that you had to have?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, our job exists to create more work hours for our members and to protect their benefits and what they already have. So that is our North Star and the only reason for us to be employed. So political power generates work hours or it could cost you work hours. It could be regulations. It could be policies that are put in place that incentivize non-union construction versus union construction. It could be the rampant epidemic of wage theft or policies to crack down on it. All of that comes through the government. And that's from the policy side, but also the construction side when it comes to projects and investments. Governor Cuomo has a significant amount of flaws, but he really did a good job when it came to unleashing our potential in the state for big projects, revamping all the airports and whatnot. So on both those, the capital side and the policy side, politics is really essential to the lifeblood of any union, especially one that's dependent on construction.
Yeah. I want to just give the listeners, who we call Skyliners, a little overview of just the union, who they're comprised of.
We're a council of about 9 locals. It includes we're often on the job from the start until the end. It's not just hanging, like general carpentry. We're doing drywall, interior. We're high-rise concrete. We are building the docks, dock builders. We are floor coverers. We are millwrights, so we install the turbines on a lot of these important high-tech facilities like nuclear power plants. We have a lot of employment at. We have divers in part of the construction unit, so we are far beyond just, I think, what people have a general impression of what a carpenter does. Yeah. We're the biggest in the city.
And how does someone who's working in this industry decide whether to, say, join your union versus another union where they can qualify? Or do they not make the decision? Can they be part of both?
You can only be a part of
one union?
You have to make a decision. But every union has their own different way of signing people up. We can organize you. In the Carpenters Union, you can be organized. So you're a non-union. We go to your work site and you get organized into the union to make the union, make the job site union. It could also be you go through the normal process where you come to an info session, you fill out, you take a test, you're ranked according to your test score. Now it's a little bit different than it used to be. It used to be you'd have to get your number pulled out. It was a lottery system. It's a little bit more merit-based now because of some of the reforms Joe's put in. So, the minute those sessions happen, we get hundreds of people falling in to our training center to learn how to become a carpenter. Never mind all the community events and job fairs we're doing. So we're out there aggressively. But that's the 2 usual ways of joining the union.
Yeah, and I assume that the more people you have, right, the more power you have politically, because then you have more bargaining power given
of course,
how many people you
have. Of course, but they have to be very responsible about making sure the membership reflects the work opportunities, right? So it doesn't do anybody good if there's so many union members and none of them get to work.
Yeah.
So they have to do a lot of forecasting and economic models to say, like, these many people are retiring. This is how much work we're expecting. This is how many apprentices we can let in to support the pension, our benefit funds, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
'Cause you can't go bankrupt. So that comes into play, and that's one of the other reasons we're so aggressive about trying to expand our job opportunities for our membership, because the more job opportunities we have, the more apprentices we can let in. But we do have what are called direct entry programs, where people who maybe, especially disadvantaged communities who were excluded historically, not anymore. We have we are probably I think about 60% now in terms of Black and Brown and other minorities in our union makeup. But for those who maybe don't have a chance or are usually excluded, low income, they're able to go to these direct entry programs, women too, of course, and veterans, where they can learn certain skills that make them more likely to either get directly put into the union or have a better chance. And so those have been very successful programs that we're very proud of. We run our own and a few others.
And so one of the issues that you deal with as part of the union is safety. And we've seen a lot of articles about construction safety, namely cranes or people, sidewalk bridges, things like that. And I definitely want to talk about that, but I want to sort of rewind to COVID. And I guess it was around 2021, so it was kind of the end. But were there any safety issues or other issues that you were involved in during that time in connection just with COVID safety issues?
I wasn't. So that was the tail end. We've been back at work for some time.
Yeah.
I think there was some start and go moments, but construction for the most part was considered essential work. And so that carried on forward. Obviously the same, I think, concerns anybody in a workplace had at that time, like what's contagious, what's not, what's safe, what's not. Most of the time we're outside anyway. So I think there was less of an issue.
What are your bounds in terms of trying to advocate for safety.
Site safety is something we're working on all the time, even when it's not in the news. Frankly, it's really tragic when it ends up in the news because a lot of times we've raised specific concerns about those locations. And you've seen that in some of the people who've died, like Carlos, Carlos, who was the namesake of Carlos's law. And we've been constantly trying to pass new laws and new regulations to really crack down on people because it is so rampant. And frankly, a lot of the times, if not always, it's on non-union sites, which is a major concern for us and I think everybody involved. Just because someone's, especially because they're so at risk of being taken advantage of, the undocumented community, they don't know their rights. Oftentimes they're coming here, they don't know the language, they don't know the rules, what they're entitled to, even as someone who's undocumented, and so that they are targets from these labor brokers and whatnot. And we have a whole department devoted to going out, finding out these locations, holding these contractors accountable, making people aware of what the contractors or the subcontractors that have been hired are not exactly the best characters. And so that's a huge part of what we do every single day.
Yeah.
The things that you're working towards, whether it's site safety or promoting more sites that have your union workers, how do you go about like that lobbying effort? What's your, I don't want you to give away trade secrets here, but what's your approach?
I don't think it's anything revolutionary. It depends on the situation at hand, right? It could be DOB or DOL. It could be going to City Hall. It could be going to the local elected officials. It all depends on, is it commercial, is it residential, is there city funding, is there pension fund money in it, all that kind of stuff. We look at the full picture of what this job site entails, and then we look for the levers to pull. And because of everything Joe has asked us to do and build upon, for the Carpenters Union, we have a lot more levers to pull now. And we are, I think anybody in the development community would tell you we're not shy about pulling them. I think our elected official friends would say the same thing. We're very loud, we don't go away, and we're very aggressive about it because there could be lives on the line, there could be fraud occurring, there could be taxpayer money at stake. So all of those things are all extremely serious issues that require a timely response. And, waiting 3 weeks for a meeting that oftentimes doesn't result in anything is just not acceptable for us. So
just to go back to your point about fraud, and one of the major things is wage fraud, and is one of the things that you were tackling, which I was reading about, which is workers who are defrauded out of money for whatever reason, either they're not paying overtime, I assume, or some other money that they're owed, and then it takes years because it takes a very long time to get the stuff audited. It takes years, if not forever, literally, where they're not getting paid. So you were one of the people that was really promoting or spearheading the wage theft Prevention Fraud Act. Is that?
Yeah, so there's a few different pieces of legislation that recently passed. One was the General Contractor Liability Law, which puts contractors on notice, and they are responsible now for what goes on their construction site, which I know is an extremely crazy concept. But then now if there's wage theft that's occurring, because most of the time these contractors have been warned, these subs are not good, they are committing wage theft, et cetera, and now they are civilly held liable for if that occurs. It's not just the sub who can magically disappear. If it's your job site, we can come after you in a civil way. But that often isn't enough, like as you alluded to, that often requires workers to come forward, risk being blackballed, risk having to make a choice between I'm going to really fight for that extra $100 that was stolen from me every single week, or take what I got so I can feed my family. That's a ridiculous choice to have to put someone who oftentimes don't have the same protections you and I in. And so it's good that we have that tool, but it's not enough. And up until last year, if you stole someone's wages, it wasn't a felony. It'd be a misdemeanor no matter how much you took from them. But if you were walking down the street and you took $2,000 from me that were in my pocket, that's felony. It's not the same when you do that with someone's wages. And so working with Catalina Cruz and Senator Breslin upstate, and Assemblymember Catalina Cruz, we were able to make wage theft a felony now. And so now district attorneys have the ability to hold these people much more accountable. And we're already seeing, I think, a much better response when accusations of wage theft are occurring, because now it's not just some civil lawsuit you can dismiss as the cost of doing business. Now we'll put you in handcuffs.
Yeah. Is that also the reason why there was a lot of support from the union for the LLC Transparency Act because
Absolutely.
it then makes people accountable, whoever actually owns the site.
Yeah, and I think it was sort of disappointing that the governor took out the public database part of it, which would have been a huge
Yeah.
organizing tool for everybody involved. And now you're seeing it with the good cause eviction law that was passed as well, right? Like how are you supposed to know who owns what with the LLCs? So I don't think that chapter has been finished, whatever metaphor you want, analogy you want to use. I don't think that book is finished quite yet. There's a few more chapters left to be written. So because it is important. You need to know who owns what because we deal with these contractors all the time, these unscrupulous ones. And not everyone's a bad actor, but there are enough of them that they're making a serious problem for workers and everybody involved. So that's 100% the idea behind the LLC Transparency Act.
And I could see how the two now correspond, which is you want that transparency to make sure you can hold them accountable, particularly if it's now a felony, right? You want to make sure that they're responsible
it's like
for it.
You should want the police to have a flashlight, and I would assume we should want that for our regulators and the people looking out for workers too.
So the next thing is and the biggie, which is the wages, and that's really kind of where a lot of it, a lot of the arguments and a lot of the pushing has come. Obviously, you still have lots to go, and you'll talk about that. But you come in 2021. 2022 is when the old 428 program expires. But I assume on your agenda, with probably a big star, was this is the opportunity. This is how we're going. How did that happen? Were you talked to about that issue, or is it something you were aware of? And then how did you handle it right away? Because I assume that it was something that you had to tackle. Because we've had a couple of failed attempts. Now we had a successful attempt, but there were still all negotiations involved the entire time. So I assume the entire 3 years that you've been in this position, you've been dealing with this.
Yeah, no, it is literally, I woke up and went to bed thinking about 421A. So in 2022, I think is when we decided we tried to fix it, tried to build a coalition to fix it. Unfortunately, other people made a different decision, the governor included. My fellow trade unions, we had a respectful disagreement at the time. We felt that this policy was not good for workers. We weren't getting any work out of it. And that left the workers who were there vulnerable to rampant exploitation. And the taxpayer was getting hosed. So we said, if you're not going to fix it, we're going to kill it. No one thought we were going to be able to do it. Everyone looks back now and goes, oh, yeah, of course that wasn't going to pass. I can assure you multiple times throughout the thing, we were told, stop being ridiculous. It's going to pass, move on. And we refused to. And so we built a very broad coalition, people in the middle and the left and the right, all those who supported labor and those who weren't exactly Mr. or Mrs. Labor, but had concerns about just the fact that the policy didn't work. And we did a tremendous amount of educating. We brought a lot of data to bear to show that it wasn't creating good jobs. It wasn't creating affordable housing, data that no one had ever had their hands on before. So they were able to make the argument internally and externally that what the hell are we doing here? So we killed it right away, and we didn't rest on our laurels. We made sure to keep working for the next year or so that when the governor came around with that insanely unnecessarily so complicated plan for her first housing plan, we said, no way. No how, and you're not going to get a deadline extension for the old 421A program, right? Because if you got your piles in, you were able to say you had started work, and therefore you had the tax break until 2026. So the developers really wanted to make sure, hey, I got my piles in because I wanted to take advantage of a loophole. Yeah. I want to make sure I can still take advantage of that loophole. So extend my deadline so I can sell the property later. And that was a major point in 2023. We said, no, you don't get that unless we get the whole program done altogether and there's significant reforms. People didn't think we were serious, and we won again. And now this time comes around, and this, I guess, was the title fight. And so we off to the races we went.
So why were there non-believers, and then how did you make it happen? Is it just that you were able to get as many political political activists on your side, those with power, that you were able to convince? Because obviously you couldn't do it yourselves, but you got those people on your side. And how did you do that?
Data, policy, and frankly, there was the stories were legion of how the program was rife with abuse and not working correctly. And we're in the middle of a housing program, and you're saying the thing that created the housing crisis is somehow going to be its salvation. So a lot of people had a difficult time with it.
Yeah.
And the governor had tremendous power in the budget, but if the votes aren't there, the votes aren't there. And so for hours and days on end, I was talking to people in Albany, texting, calling, harassing, popping up in offices to make sure we kept our coalition strong, and very aggressively answering any questions that came away, because I think people underestimate the value in being an honest broker. And, we didn't warp numbers. We didn't try and negotiate in bad faith and anything like that. We felt that there's power in being responsible and being honest. Yeah. And if you're not going to get everything you want, at least people will trust you for the next round, go round. And so that's what we did. And I think it had a real transformational effect on the debate in Albany that year.
Did you get together with the other trade unions? I know you said you had a respectful disagreement previously, but did the unions try to get together and almost create like a super union where they're trying to push things that are all good for all union members?
It happens from time to time, but not always. You have to protect your members, right? So sometimes those interests diverge.
Yeah.
So that year we were the only trade standing and saying this program sucks, and eviscerating it and then killing it. The next year, I believe all the building trades said the same thing, that this program doesn't work and it can't come back, because the governor tried to do an end run around all of us with that announcement in Gowanus.
The Gowanus, right?
Yeah. I've never seen the trades that angry and more united, because that was a middle finger to us, and the fact that labor standards weren't even included. So we said, good luck.
Yeah, so
here we go.
It's interesting because we don't see it from that perspective, right? Because it's interesting to see your perspective. For us, it's like she was almost giving a middle finger to the legislature, but no, really, she's giving the middle finger to the people who wanted that change to the program to help the construction workers. Like there's more to it than that, but it's like we're aiming at the legislatures. We're not really thinking about the unions who and the laborers and the construction workers. That's why I think this perspective is a very unique and interesting one to understand. Do you recall, it might be difficult to remember, what prevented, is it just they said, we're not including any standards for wages in any new program?
The building trades and revenue made a deal, I guess, at that time. We felt the deal wasn't sufficient. And we were told in no uncertain terms the deal isn't going to change. You don't have the votes. We then ended up having the votes. And so I think that was a bit of a surprise to some in the development community. And that's how we ended up killing it, because it all comes down to a simple math problem. You either have the votes or you don't.
So what happens is revenue went together with another trade council. They would negotiate, and then hoping that them together would go in and have enough votes to be able to go their way. So it's really all just, we make a deal and now we're on the same page.
Right.
But you had some interesting choice words for Rebney about 420 Way, their negotiations and their focus. I don't know if you want to just touch upon that, which is, what was Rebney's focus versus what they really should have been focused on, in your opinion, at least from your perspective.
Yeah, I do personally like everybody involved in the government relations team, and I have no idea who makes the decisions over there. They operate with a different, we all operate under the fog of war, and they see the chessboard a little bit differently, and so everyone just has to sort of roll the dice at one point and hope their strategy pays off. But, they very clearly said that their number one priority is to make sure that this average wage system, which meant that at the end of a construction project, all the construction workers, regardless of what trade they're in or if they're in a union or not, at all their hours they work, everybody's wages, when it all averages out, has to hit a magic number. That system is unnecessarily complicated, but probably designed to provide as much flexibility to a contractor and a developer to game the wages as much as they could. It's a beautiful system for a developer. We think it was rife with abuse, and that's why Comptroller Brad Lander found on just one site in 2019 upwards of $40 million worth of wage theft. Yeah. One site, that's from 2019, and that's the only audit they've been able to complete so far. So just imagine what else is out there, right? There was thousands of these projects. So again, and this all goes back to our philosophy and our union. You bring data and policy and trust to any policy debate, and you end up in a better place. So we felt, based on our conversations with the legislature, that there is no way in how we were going to agree to a system like that, and that the elected officials would be with us, the legislators would be with us, and they were.
Yeah.
They all agreed that the average wage system sucked, and so we were like, if that's going to be the title fight, let's have it. And it was very tense. It was aggressive. The negotiations were up and down and all around. But when the dust cleared, there was no more average wage system.
Yeah. So I just wanted to get into a little bit of nitty gritty because I'm trying to imagine what it's like, and I would love for people to have pictures in their heads. So when I'm doing a
negotiating in person,
yeah. So when I'm
Sometimes.
yeah, when I'm negotiating, it's like you call the other side, maybe you write an email, then it's a couple of
Little
days
back
pass
and
by, it's
forth.
back and forth. You have a meeting, whatever it is. Is it you guys are just like, we're going to talk until somebody says, I'm not going to talk anymore, and you guys are sitting in a room and just every single day coming there at 9 till 5, and is that really what it is?
In this go-around, we worked very closely with Gary LaBarbera, who's the head of the Building Trades Council, which has basically the umbrella organization for all the building trades.
Yeah.
And so us, and because this has been our number one issue for 3 years now, we're at the vanguard of it, and we worked very closely with Gary. But it's inside, I don't know if any sit-down negotiations happened after a certain point. There was a lot of phone calls, a lot of texts, a lot of conversations with the governor's office and others about what's acceptable and what's not. And while all that's going on, I'm out there rallying support. We're in the press where we're maintaining a very aggressive posture because what we've learned is Remini just doesn't say yes because it's a good policy. And to be fair, they shouldn't. That's their job to represent their members, even if their members have a very bad idea about how power works in Albany. Mm-hmm. And they made some very serious strategic miscalculations, and we took advantage of it, I think, for the benefit of workers and taxpayers.
Yeah. And one of the things that was the minimum wage was obviously very important, but geography was also important, is to make sure that minimum wage spread across the city so every worker has a fair wage, is able to. One of the things that you said, which is I think is very interesting, so that they can live in the buildings that they're hired to build.
Right.
Yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense. You said in a probably better way actually, but that's
no,
essentially the gist.
that sounded appropriately poetic. So I think that was definitely
Thanks. I'll take the compliment when I can. Yeah. So the geography and the minimum wage, obviously you didn't get everything that you wanted. You got a good deal, but maybe you want to talk about the things you didn't get. What were you happy with? Did you get to read the language afterwards to approve it?
I won't talk about when we got a hold of the language, but what I will say is, obviously you can't get everything you want, but we did get the wage, which was the title fight, the enforcement piece. Now, if you commit wage theft on a 485X property, you have the chance that you'll lose your tax break. So good luck explaining that to the people who are financing your project if you're not going to use contractors who are going to do the right thing. We're going to make sure everybody knows about that. And then the unit threshold went from 300 to 150, so that if a construction project has more than 150 units, they will now have the wage standard depending on where you are in the geography. And since I know you're listening base, like I'd be very careful about trying to game the system to not to say, oh, I have 3 buildings that are 149 each or something like that. Like there's going to be significant enforcement, and you're not going to be able to get around some of these would-be loopholes that maybe some people are already devising. Yeah. But then the other component of it is the geography and where this large, because there's 3 different zones in some respects, right? You have the highest wage standard, which is 96th Street and below, and Long Island City and some other parts, right? And Williamsburg. Yeah. Then you have Zone B, which is like Brownstone, Brooklyn, and Hallett's Point, and a part of Astoria. And then Zone C, we're calling, is everything else. And that's that $35, $40 hour wage that the laborers wanted. But so there's those 3 zones. So depending on where you are, depends on what rules you have to follow when it comes to what specific you're paying that person. And so we wanted, obviously, to apply to the entire city, but we can't get everything you wanted. But we're also not stopping. This was not the end of the fight as far as we're concerned. It is back. It has the strongest labor standards it's ever had in the history of its existence as a program. Very excited about that, but we're also not thrilled that the Bronx was excluded, that Jamaica Queens was excluded, that Upper Manhattan was excluded, because that's going to be some sites of some serious construction, and we are not going to forget those workers just because they live in a zip code. As much as it probably pains the elected officials to hear, we're still going to be talking about 485X now until until the end of time at the way this is going, because until we feel that a sufficient amount of New York City is covered and most of the work is covered, we're not done yet. And so that fight's going to continue on.
Yeah.
And on.
So if you're a worker, say, living in the Bronx, for instance, which is not covered under the new 45X, couldn't you work in Manhattan, or is there some local hire requirements?
You could. So most workers want to work closer to home, right? There's childcare at stake. There's the local economy, commutes, all that fun stuff. Yeah. So, and that's where a lot of construction is happening. If you look at permits, if you look at rezonings, you look at all that fun stuff that allows you to forecast where most of the construction is going to be occurring. A lot of the work has already been done in 96th Street south of Manhattan, right? Long Island City already seen a significant amount of construction. And so a wage standards is nice and it's appreciated, especially for those who are going to be able to benefit from it. But if the majority are not benefiting from it, then we have not done our job. And so that's why pencils were down, and we already are looking at, all right, what do we do now to expand the geographic boundary? Because the idea that we can't build, or those areas can't support the wage standards, is bullshit, because we in the unions have put together, it's potentially up to $400 million in investments from different pension funds to build affordable housing. It's going to be workforce housing, so it's not going to have fancy luxury apartments to quote unquote subsidize the affordable housing. It's straight workforce housing, and it's going to be done without the 45X tax break, but it will be done with union labor. So how come we figured it out and we know how to build housing with union labor, with union wages, and make a profit, but everybody else somehow can't? Like, I see them crying about in Williamsburg, oh, we can't build it now all of a sudden with these new wage standards. They're in the same article with the same breath. They say, oh, but if the interest rates change, we'll probably build. So we're onto the game, and we're making sure everybody else is too. People can chase headlines because they lost in Albany and try to convince people that that's the reason it's not being built, when every single person with any sense of how this construction industry works knows the real reason right now is inflation rates, or some people made some really bad financial decisions and thought that the interest rates would stay low forever, and that's when they bought land, and that's how they invested. Told themselves that that's what's always going to be, and now they're in deep trouble because the land's not as valuable as it used to be. So it's not the state's job to fix your silly financial investments, no matter because you're rich. The state's job is to pass policies that benefit the entire state, and so the 45X, not perfect by any means, but it's a big step forward, I think, for workers, and it will be used by a good amount of people as well.
Yeah, I think so. And what are the things that you suggested or someone suggested be included in 45X that you didn't get, that you were maybe the most disappointed that didn't get in there, if you can think of anything like that?
After meeting you, likely pushing for in the future.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just the geography.
The geography stuff?
That's literally the only thing.
What was the proposal initially? Was there just universal throughout the city? That was the proposal. Mm-hmm. And then who introduced that concept of the zones?
It was a holdover from the previous program. The map is similar to the old program. It's just expanded, and the zone where with the highest wage standard is now expanded as well. So, and that's Revenue's fault, because they're the ones who said those areas can support higher wages, but now suddenly they can't. I don't know. It's hard to keep track with them, but it's a holdover from that program, and I guess someone in the governor's office decided that the Revenue had to get something in the concession, in the agreement, because they weren't getting anything else. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry, I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy. Like, if you're wrong, you're wrong, and you don't get good government, you don't get a handout from the state because of it, but because your feelings were hurt. But I'm not the governor.
Yeah. So,
or whoever made that decision.
So 45X creates these for certain size projects, creates these minimum wage requirements for union labor, right? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't.
Not necessarily union labor.
So that's what I was going to.
We were very, very specific that this is not. You're not PLA requirements. You get some benefits from using union labor, like you don't have to apply with some of the auditing requirements that are now put on place to make sure people aren't cheating, and some other benefits. But if you are in that wage standard, you have to pay that worker whether they're in a union or not that fixed rate. I think it's 35% off of prevailing wage, or $72, whichever one is left, right? So if you're in a union, you're getting that. If you're in a non-union, you're getting that. So it's up to the union contractors to be competitive. If we can't get competitive, we don't get the work. This is not a grab by the unions to gobble up all that work unfairly and inflate costs and do all that kind of stuff. Like, this is a good policy that benefits everybody, whether you're in a union or not.
It was specific and it was purposeful to make sure it deals with all workers. So you're essentially creating this protection for everyone, whether they're union or not. Mm-hmm. And that's still that's a prerogative to that protection, even if they're not, because who knows, maybe one day they will become members.
Right. Well, the hope is we get as much work as possible to let more and more people in. That's the dream of the union. There's no incentive for us to keep it closed. Maybe in the 70s and 80s, there were 90s, there were trade unions that were not willing to let people in. That's not the case anymore, and it has not been for a very, very long time. And it behooves us, if we want to continue to exist, to bring as many people in from every walk of life and every part of the city. That's our whole reason of being. And so we want more people, because if you don't have enough members, your pension funds are not solvent. You can't go out and expand. You can't get more work, and you'll devour yourself. So no, we want as much work as possible, but if we're not getting the work, we want to make sure it's a level playing field for everybody involved, so no workers are being mistreated just because they don't have our protections.
Makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. And worker protection, it's an important topic for you and for the union, so why not protect everybody, even if they're not necessarily members today? Once 485X came out and the language came out and people knew more of the specifics, I guess your constituents or your those that are in your union, how did they react?
Joe Geiger, the head of our union, reflects everybody's feelings on this, which is like, great step, not done. And the fact that the Bronx was excluded and Jamaica was excluded and Upper Manhattan was excluded is just not acceptable. And so we got to get back to work. So we're not really big on high fives. We won. Construction is too up and down to sort of rest on your laurels and be happy with what you got. So we have to that's really it. It wasn't like we weren't popping champagne saying we beat Redmond. Even if we did, it was, all right, this is what we got. What do we need to do to fix it? And that's, for better or worse, that's how we operate.
And now you're dreaming about 485X every night instead of 421A? Is that what it is?
Every night I would go to bed thinking, I can't wait for next January to start talking about it in Albany again.
Were you? I guess you were in comptroller's office, so maybe you were. But were you familiar at all with the tax incentive?
No.
Beforehand, not at all, right? And then it became your life.
It became my life.
That's unbelievable.
Well,
that you had.
That's what happens when you expand into a new industry. I had no idea about 429 before I was started working here. Like,
and then it becomes your whole existence.
That's all you know.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, I think it's an interesting thing to have. And what's the future? What are the fights that you guys are involved in now, to the extent you can talk about them, and what things do you have to wait 10 years before this thing expires, or are you going to start now?
No, we're as far as I'm concerned, we're gearing up for next session. So I don't care what anybody else says. No one thought the program would die in the first place, and then we killed it, right? So you have to keep fighting, no matter what other people say. So we are gearing up for the fights to expand it, looking at all levers to pull to do so. We are looking at expanding prevailing wage laws, fixing some stuff up in Albany because every time you pass a law, people try to find new loopholes. And so we're going to try and close those loopholes so that people, when the state is paying money on any given project, those workers are not being paid poverty wages. So that's our goal, and unfortunately there's a lot of work to do in reaching it to make sure no one else is exploited. So that's what we're going to keep doing. And the big question is sort of, what does real estate do? Do they continue this philosophy up there where they think every nail's a hammer, and then you can just bludgeon legislators into agreeing with them, and frankly, which didn't work out too well with them. We won on 485X. The good cause people, it wasn't supposed to ever happen, but Redmond had to agree to it in the end, even if there were concessions. That's often what happens with the first iteration of a bill. Yeah. So the fact that they even got it over the finish line, not great. And then the IAIs, they really wanted those to be dramatically expanded. Yeah. I mean, I heard crazy numbers, and they didn't get him. They barely got it
Nothing,
above
right?
of inflation. So if I'm them, I would start to be like, what are we doing wrong? And maybe that involves actually working with labor instead of trying to undermine or beat us at our own game, because every time they've taken us on, we've won. So that's sort of a big question. What's to come in that sort of relationship? Because it's better when we have a harmonious relationship. Better things happen. There's better policy involved. But as I think it's pretty clear, we have no problem throwing a punch.
Yeah.
So,
So you guys do talk to Rebney, but there's not really much that's come of that relationship where you get closer to the same side, right? There's not been that camaraderie of, hey, understand my perspective even if you don't agree with it, so that we can then have a more productive construction, more happier and wage friendly environment. Those types of things. It's not really transpired, right? It's still kind of
Yeah,
yin
it
and
sounds
yang.
more adversarial.
Yeah.
It is, and it's sad because it doesn't have to be, and it wasn't always like that. And I don't think it serves them well to be duking it out with us. We have better relationships. We can talk to the legislators. They can't, because frankly, the way they've operated in Albany and politics in general has alienated a lot of people. So you need us if you want to do something better off for your members. Our members are often employed in their job sites, or some of them, not all of them. And so it doesn't make sense to be in this adversarial relationship, but I have fun doing it. So by all means, if you want to keep going, let's
Come at
go.
me, bro.
It'll be more fun,
basically.
less adversarial, because then you can actually get to
Right.
yes a little quicker.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. That ultimately that's the goal. If you compare and contrast our initial offers with Rebney's initial offers, I can assure you it's almost to a T a lot of what we asked for. We didn't have to do those nonsense of a marathon of fighting each other for 2.5 months, 3 months. We could have just
Right.
got into a more reasonable accommodation. They probably would have been better off if we were able to get they would have gotten a little bit more of what they wanted.
Yeah, I think I found a negotiation is better with honey than vinegar, because
I agree.
yeah, there's something different. I tried both strategies, and the adversarial one doesn't necessarily, like the bludgeoning, doesn't necessarily get you a better result.
Yeah.
It could sometimes, depending on who's on the other side, but I
Especially-
would urge
yeah.
that if somebody from Rebney or anybody else is listening, to heed that call. I think
Right.
Yeah.
working together and coming to a conclusion where housing is better, and the people who build housing, it's better for them. It works. I think it works. And I don't know if you have any final questions,
We
but
had so much information.
Yeah, I mean,
I
I've-
learned
A lot
so
of
much.
information.
Loved it.
yeah, so we were just in awe. Thank you so much for coming in and giving us
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
kind of political explanation and background, because we're so much involved in the 421A and the technical aspects of it that we don't hear this perspective as much as we'd like to, and understanding the side of the worker and the things that really drive them and move them forward is, I think, important, because guess what? Who's gonna put up these
Who's
buildings?
actually gonna build the skyline?
or shape?
That's right. Shape it.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have anything else that you want to share that you haven't already, but I think you've been
That's
just
it.
such a great source
Yeah.
of knowledge, and appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thank you for coming in and
appreciate
lending
it.
your perspective
Yeah.
to us.
Thanks
We
for having me.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Well, everyone, that's our show. Thanks so much for listening.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave comments, because we love to hear from our audience, right, Brenda?
Yeah, feel free to reach out at info@sideandshine.com or visit our website at sideandshine.com. We really look forward to hearing from you.
You could also reach out to David and Brenda at dshamshovich@sideandshine.com and Brenda Slakowski at sideandshine.com.
You want to spell that?
B Slakowski at sideandshine.com.
Those are lengthy last names. You can just find us on our website.
That's right.